Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Heather Schoenfeld. I'm an associate professor in the sociology department. So the problems and solutions that have been discussed by my esteemed colleagues today, from hyper-policing to firearm violence to the solutions such as targeting communities for more investment. All of these things have to do with politics, or the exercise of power through decisions around the distribution of resources. So what my research does is examines politics in the form of decisions about how and for whom safety and justice is provided by governmental bodies. So my book on the history of mass incarceration in the US demonstrates, for example, that imprisonment rates grew because of a series of decisions that actual people made. My current research compares the criminal legal system and reform efforts in 6 different states between 2000 and the present. And I am particularly focused on reforms or non-reforms that have an impact on the prison population and conditions of confinement. And these are the states that I'm looking at. In order to understand, though, how policy change happens, we need to start with a framework of the policy process. And so my framework takes what we all usually think of when we think of the policy process, and that is A, B, and C. So someone or many people define something as a problem. There are solutions that are proposed and discussed. And then there's deliberation, which thinks about those solutions, but also takes into account the interests of the people at the table doing the deliberating. I try to get at the things that come and precede that the problem solutions deliberation process. So these include ideas or cultural scripts that guide what is thinkable for people, particularly people who are in power, what is talked about, what is neglected, interests. So who's at the table and what interests do they have in the outcome, capacities. What does the state have in place to solve the problem? So we've seen this in a lot of the presentations where the US has built capacity in policing, but not mental health services, or put homeless services in the police department as opposed to somewhere else. Rules. What are the formal and informal rules that designate how decisions are made? And then finally, risks or opportunities. So are there opportunities created by shifts and balances of power, new people at the table, new organizations making different arguments? So I'm going to give a very brief example of this. So looking at early prison reform between 2000 and 2006 in the United States. So I wanted to know what led some state officials to embark on reform aimed at reducing prison populations and why some were more successful than others. So after 9/11, 2001, an economic recession and a decreased focus on domestic crime in favor of a focus on terrorism made it possible to think about changing incarceration policy. In New Jersey, as I put up there, they also faced a court order to fix some things with their parole system. So in 4 out of 6 states, governors started to believe that continuing to build and maintain new prisons was too expensive, but they faced a problem. They had a risk of appearing soft on crime. And there was resistance from legislators who were clearly still in the mindset of the 1990s, which was you put everyone behind bars. So to overcome this political resistance, they framed the problem as one of administrative efficiency. And their proposed solutions were shaped by the existence of discretionary parole release in their states. And then rules determine whether those new policies gave state administrators autonomy through executive power rather than through the legislative process, which made it less contested or not contested in some cases. And as a result, two of the states that we studied, Michigan and New Jersey, were able to reorganize their parole process and parole bureaucracy to increase releases from prison, decrease returns to prison of people on parole. So what are the implications? I promised my father that I would end on some positive notes, and I think we've heard a lot of things to depress us here today. So when we're interested in changing outcomes, such as unhealthy prison conditions, for example, we often jump to the policy prescriptions, right? Which is important, obviously. We want to think about mandating more health services. In my case, I think about putting up cameras to protect people from violence, but we often don't think about the things that are going to support those policy changes. And those include, right, ideas. So for example, thinking about changing the idea that people have a right to be protected from violence while they're in prison to thinking about incarceration as violence, right? Interests, risks, and opportunities. So changing the political consequences of doing nothing. So working with advocacy organizations who work with government who are making these changes. Capacity, we can support the building capacity in other institutions outside of the criminal legal system. Rules, knowing the rules about, how decisions are made, right, tells us where to focus our efforts. And ultimately, I think thinking in these terms allows forward momentum, even when policy change is not politically feasible at the moment. Thank you.